The heart is myogenic, which means it has the characteristic of self-propagation. In other words, it beats on its own. It's comprised of autorhythmic cells, which have slow leakage channels, which slowly allow them to depolarize to threshold and to send signals to the other myocardial cells within the heart. These autorhythmic cells are strategically found throughout the heart. For instance, the SA node is located in the right atria. The sinoatrial node is the pacemaker of the heart. It establishes what's known as the sinus rhythm of the heart. The AV node, which is found between the actual atrial and ventricular border, carries the signals down to the AV bundle, or also known as the bundle of His, which is found between the ventricular septum, and the right and left bundle branches, respectively, carry the signal down to the apex, and then the signal propagates back up through the Purkinje fibers from the apex and spreads throughout the ventricular myocardium, causing it to contract and to twist in the contraction. The heart has been popularized in literature by people like Edgar Allan Poe in his short story, The Telltale Heart, where the heart can be actually buried and continue to beat, to some extent because of the myogenicity. When you cut the heart into different pieces, each one of these individual pieces will continue to contract, but at a different rhythm. Inside the ventricular septum, there are the Purkinje fibers, or the Purkinje network, which is actually named for a Dutch histologist. And then housed inside what we see as the actual septum is the bundle of His, which is actually named for the German doctor who first described it. This figure is actually from page 733 in your textbook, and it shows you the conduction pathway. Of importance here is that when the sinoatrial node depolarizes, it simultaneously causes depolarization of both the right and also the left atria. So they depolarize at the same time. The signal is then sent down. It's delayed, but it's sent down to the actual AV node. It's delayed because of that fibrous skeleton. When the signal then is transmitted through the AV node, it very quickly is sent down through the actual bundle of His between the actual ventricles and that intraventricular septum. And then it comes back up through what we see as the actual apex. And when it comes back up through those Purkinje fibers, it causes the heart to contract in a ringing type of motion with these muscles that circle the actual ventricles. So it kind of rings the heart out. Simultaneously, contraction of the right and the left atria, followed by contraction of the right and the left ventricles. This can be seen very well on the Blaufus site, which is actually shown as a link on the angel. If you take a look at that, it's a really good demonstration of that contraction. Systole is ventricular or atrial contraction, and diastole is ventricular or atrial relaxation. The sinus rhythm is established by the SA node, and a normal sinus rhythm is somewhere between 70 to 80 beats per minute. However, it can be lower, it can be higher. Ectopic foci are depolarization from autorhythmic cells outside of the normal conduction pathway. When there's damage to the SA node, it falls upon the AV node to set the rhythm of the heart. We call this a nodal rhythm, and it drops to about 40 to 50 beats per minute because of the delay in the signal. If the AV node is damaged, then it falls upon the actual bundle branches and the Purkinje fibers. We call this the intrinsic ventricular rhythm, and there again it drops again to about 20 to 40 beats per minute, which may not actually produce a great enough volume and therefore pressure to sustain life there. If there's damage to the SA node, typically a pacemaker is put in to establish the normal rhythm of the heart. An arrhythmia or dysrhythmia is an abnormal cardiac rhythm, and this can be caused by a variety of different things, such as a heart block, failure of the conduction system, for instance, bundle branch block, damage to one of the bundle branches or both, in the case of a total heart block. The SA node has no stable resting membrane potential because it actually has leakage channels. We call this the pacemaker potential because these leakage channels slowly allow for sodium to flow into these autorhythmic cells and gradually start to depolarize it from a resting membrane potential of about 60 millivolts. As it starts to depolarize, it reaches threshold at about negative 40 millivolts, and this in turn causes fast calcium channels to open until it depolarizes to about 0 millivolts, and at which point then it starts the repolarization. This is what we call the action potential. Once it reaches that 0 millivolts and starts the repolarization, it initially opens potassium channels, and the efflux of potassium out of the cells causes the repolarization, causes it to go back to the resting membrane potential of 60 millivolts. Each depolarization causes one heartbeat, and it takes about 0.8 seconds, which gives you a resting heart rate of about 75 beats per minute. This picture, which can also be seen on page 733 in your book, figure 2010, just simply shows you the SA node potentials, where you're starting out at about negative 60 millivolts. Sodium is slowly flowing in through the leakage channels. This eventually reaches threshold at negative 40 millivolts. Elevating it to what we see as threshold causes calcium channels to open. These fast calcium channels once again elevate what we see as that resting membrane potential to about 0, okay, and we see that as the action potential as it goes from negative 40 all the way up to 0. And then at that point you open your potassium channels. Potassium flows out, and this once again returns us back to that resting membrane potential of negative 60. This happens at regular intervals of about 0.8 seconds. When the SA node depolarizes and causes in turn the atria to depolarize, the signal then travels about 1 meter per second through the atria until it reaches the AV node. When it reaches that AV node, the signals are slowed down by that fibrous skeleton between the atria and the ventricles, and this allows adequate time for the ventricles to fill with blood. So it slows down to about 0.05 meters per second. Now, when the AV node fires, the signal speeds up again as it's transmitted down through the bundle of His, down through the bundle branches. It speeds up to about 4 meters per second. So it quickly speeds up again as it's transmitted down through the ventricular septum, and then back up through what we see as the actual Purkinje fibers. The signal first reaches the papillary muscles, and what this does is allows for those chordae to actually contract, and the chordae, the actual tendons, to tighten so that those valves will not prolapse, so that the actual cusps on the valves won't actually prolapse. So the papillary muscles get the signal first, and this stabilizes those AV valves. And then you have ventricular systole starting at the apex. It works upwards through a spiral arrangement like you're wringing a towel. The myocytes that make up the rest of the heart outside of the conductive pathway have a stable resting potential of about negative 90 millivolts, which is slightly more negative than what we see with the autorhythmic cells, which have a resting membrane potential of about negative 60. When the conduction pathway sends signals out through either the SA node, the AV node, or the bundle of His with the Purkinje fibers, this causes sodium channels to open in the myocardium, and in turn causes these cells to depolarize the threshold, causing additional sodium channels, positive feedback, additional sodium channels to open until eventually the action potential peaks at about positive 30, at which point then you have a plateau phase anywhere from about 200 to 250 milliseconds. This is a slow sustained contraction where you have slow calcium channels opening. Calcium then binds to fast calcium channels in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and this increase in calcium into what we see as the cytosol actually maintains that contraction. This is what we call absolute refractory period, and we see a longer absolute refractory period, particularly in cardiac cells. The repolarization happens when the calcium channels close, potassium channels open. Potassium is then released, and these myocardial cells go back to the resting membrane potential. We have a syncytium, or a network, formed through all these myocardial cells that causes them to all depolarize at the same time. And this figure, which is also shown in your book on page 734, figure 2011, just simply shows where you're starting with the myocardial cells at a negative 90, and then it slowly reaches the threshold at about negative 40, and this causes the action potential, which eventually culminates at a positive 30 before you reach that plateau phase, which lasts about 200 to 250 milliseconds before the repolarization and the potassium channels open.